Democrats releasing 6 years' worth of former President Trump's tax returns, giving deeper insight into his personal financial situation. Right now, CNN is sifting through the hundreds of documents that were just released in the last hour. But the former president is already responding. CNN national correspondent Kristen Holmes joins me now to break it all down. Kristen, walk us through what we're learning from these tax returns. Again, the caveat being they just came out an hour ago, and there's a lot of data here, and also how the former president is responding.
So, as you said, we have a team combing through literally hundreds and hundreds of pages. But what we've been able to confirm so far is that Trump paid a very low amount of income tax in his first and last year of the presidency. We're talking about 2017, he only paid $750. 2018 and 19, it was combined $1.1 million in income tax. And 2020, it was $0. Now, that $0 is important, and here's why. What we hope that these tax returns will show is not just the raw data of the numbers, but it's actually looking at the detailed documents that were provided to give us some sort of insight into his businesses. Are they really as successful as he has said? And I talked to a number of tax experts who say that $0, that indicates that there might have been some faltering business. Is it really just strategic accounting, which we know Trump has boasted about for years? He even said in 2016 that it was smart not to pay taxes when he was talking with Hillary Clinton about why he wouldn't release them. But is it actually business losses, which is important when you think about the political ramifications of a man who ran on the fact that he was a wealthy and therefore successful businessman. And of course, Trump is agitated about this release. He has already issued a statement. He said Democrats shouldn't have done this. And he went on to say the great USA divide will now grow far worse. The radical left Democrats have weaponized everything. But remember that this is a dangerous two-way street. And he released a video last week as part of his 2024 campaign, essentially calling on Republicans to start looking into Biden's finances and to Biden's family. So that's what he's referring to there when he talks about a two-way street.
And of course, the GOP is taking over the House in mere days. They're going to have a lot of oversight. We also know that House Ways and Means Chairman Richard Neal put out a statement this morning after this came out. What did he say? Of course, he's the Democrat.
Right. And he said, Congress serves as a check on the executive branch, and our committee is entrusted with oversight of our revenue system. A president is no ordinary taxpayer. They hold power and influence unlike any other American. And with great power comes greater responsibility. And of course, the important thing to note here is that Trump set an enormous amount, he broke an enormous amount of precedent when he was running for president and then was president. He became the first president in modern history not to release his taxes. This was something he chose to do. And on top of that, this is something that for decades he has shielded from the public. And one other thing I want to quickly touch on that we're looking for here is foreign entities and bank accounts. That's something we're going through these additional documents for. Does he have foreign bank accounts? Are there any foreign-owned businesses? The reason that's important is because you remember this was a big topic of conversation during his entire presidency. So that is something we're going to be looking at closely as we go through these hundreds of pages.
Right, a lot of data there to sort through. All right, Kristen, stay with us. We want to talk a little bit more about this, but we also want to bring in CNN political analyst Margaret Talev, managing editor for Axios, and Stephen Rosenthal, senior fellow at Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center. Great to have you all here. Margaret, let's start first with you. As I mentioned, the GOP taking control of the House in just mere days, timing everything here. The Democrats releasing these at the last minute they kind of could. We know that Republicans are planning for a lot of oversight investigations, but is there any indication you think that they're going to try to push back on this specifically?
I think they're going to message around it, and we've already seen that. But Republicans actually have an opportunity right now. If they want to, they can push to put this in legislation so that future presidents, including Democratic presidents, will be required to release this. That's not where their messaging is at right now, and it might never get there. Are they going to use this to try to require more disclosure, not only from Joe Biden, but from everyone in Joe Biden's family? Probably. But the truth of the matter is there's a difference between running for president of the United States and being related to somebody or in somebody's family or even a candidate for other kinds of office. This has long been what Americans expect. And the messaging from Republicans so far has been that if they can do this to Donald Trump, they can do this to you. Like the ordinary person will somehow have all of their voluminous, tax information revealed. It's, first of all, simply not true. Second of all, there's no interest in making an ordinary member of the public's tax returns public for the world to see. And third of all, if you did, what would it show? Most people can file an easy return. Many people who earn a fraction of what Donald Trump's holdings are paid much more in taxes in 2020, to the best of everyone's knowledge. And so it is, so far the messaging is kind of a scare tactic, but it's really not on point. There is a completely different standard, and the polling shows that huge majority, somewhere between 2/3 and 4 out of 5 Americans, say that former President Trump's tax return should be made public.
Well, and it is the precedent. And to your point, the average American is not running for president or the president. There are very few Americans doing that. Stephen, can you explain some of the things you'd be looking for that would be, say, a blockbuster revelation beyond what we've already learned in bits and pieces, or key nuggets that could be gleaned from this?
Well, we just got the documents posted, and I've been looking closely at foreign accounts and foreign sources of income in the last hour. What strikes me immediately is that in 2015, 16, and 17, Donald Trump had foreign accounts in the UK, Ireland, China, and also looks like St. Thomas, ST. But then in 2018, only UK, and 2019 and 20, only UK. And so that's one of the things I'm looking at. And we know from last month's trial of the Trump Organization in New York that Trump's accountants, tax accountants, said that his presidential returns had to be squeaky clean. So I suspect that things got cleaned up some later on.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is interesting, and that's a little bit of what Kristen was talking about earlier too. Is that you were saying that it's going to be key about foreign entities. Where were the investments? Where was the money going? What foreign entities was he involved with? We also know that President Trump was supposed to have a mandatory audit from the IRS, and he didn't have one 3 out of 4 years. He was always so paranoid around his taxes, as you alluded to earlier. Do you think that there's any appetite to codify this into law from it would have to come through Congress, but also, doesn't this just speak to just the broader paranoia of Trump's feelings around his money and his taxes?
Yeah, and I do think this goes to politics in general. When you're thinking about Trump, we can always say, is his base going to turn on him for everything that happens, right? Any kind of glitch in the order. And is this something that's going to do that? Probably not. But when you look at Trump, the things that he really cares about are his image and the narrative that he built for the last several decades before he ran for president, before he even was considering that level of politics. This is something that he sold his entire life on, the Trump Hotel. It was his brand, and it's associated with success and wealth. So that is part of why there have been rumors for decades around New York that he might not be as wealthy as he seemed. In fact, I talked to some of his closest associates back from those days who said they believed he would never run for president because it would be too much financial scrutiny, and they just didn't believe that because he is so private and so invested in not sharing this information publicly that he just couldn't get through that and run for president. Of course, obviously he did, and he did not release his taxes and broke precedent there. But yes, this is a big part of how he even ran back in 2016. He said that if he could be the successful of a businessman, then he could successfully run a nation. And that's why we're looking so closely at just how successful those businesses were. And that's why it's so interesting when you look at the fact that, yes, some of this is strategic accounting. This is something that people who have this kind of money and these kind of resources do. They claim these large losses, and then they carry over millions and millions of dollars. We already know he carried over $105 million in 2015, $73 million. These are losses that he carries over in order to offset his income tax and pay less money. But when you look at that 2020 number, did that actually come from those offsets, or was this a COVID number coming at that time where businesses were severely impacted? And so it's just going to be interesting to paint a picture of this because we only know one narrative, and it has been Donald Trump's narrative that he is a wealthy, successful businessman, and that is what gives him this power and this strength in this country.
And Stephen, do you believe that presidents should be required by law to disclose their tax returns? I mean, should this be codified and made mandatory? Should there be a mandatory audit?
Yes. Tax returns are a window into a person's financial character. And we need to know about our president as to whether he's pursuing our interest or his own. And to your point earlier, sure, legislation would be quite helpful, and the House already passed legislation, but it couldn't get passed by the Senate before the Congress adjourned. As to rich people generating and carrying over hundreds of millions of dollars of losses, in my practice experience, that's unusual. Trump lost money spectacularly, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars through the 1990s and 2000s. For this 5-year period, 2015 through 2020, Trump's businesses lost $7 to $20 million over the term. Every single year he lost money. Now the question ultimately is, are those losses real? Was he an unlucky business person, or did he inflate those losses? For that, we need further information.